The winter of 1876 arrived early in Montana Territory, bringing with it fierce winds and snow that seemed endless. 10-year-old Emma McAllister stood at the small window of her family's cabin, watching the white landscape stretch out before her like a frozen ocean. She pressed her thin hand against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through her fingertips. Outside, the world looked beautiful but deadly. Inside, the cabin felt just as cold. Emma's mother, Sarah McAllister, knelt by the fireplace, carefully adding small pieces of wood to the flames. They had to be careful with firewood now. Each log was precious, and winter had only just begun. The pile outside their cabin was getting smaller every day. Sarah's hands were red and cracked from the cold and hard work. But she never complained. She simply did what needed to be done. The cabin itself was small and simple. Just one room served as their kitchen. Bedroom and living space all together, the walls were made of rough logs chinked with mud and moss to keep out the wind. But cold air still found its way inside through tiny gaps. A simple wooden table sat in the center of the room with 2 rickety chairs. In the corner, a small bed with worn blankets was where mother and daughter slept. Huddled together for warmth, above the fireplace hung a single pot. Blackened from years of use, life had not always been this hard for Emma and her mother. Just 1 year ago, her father, Thomas McAllister, had been alive. He had been a strong man with kind eyes and rough hands. He worked the land from sunrise to sunset, always promising that things would get better. He talked about planting more crops in the spring and maybe getting a cow or 2. His dreams filled their little cabin with hope. But last spring, while fixing the roof, he fell and hit his head on a rock. He never woke up. After Thomas died, everything changed. Sarah tried to keep the homestead running, but it was too much work for one woman alone. The garden they had planted together failed without his care. The few chickens they owned barely laid enough eggs to eat. There was no money for supplies, no way to buy seeds for next season, and no husband to help carry the heavy burdens of frontier life. They were alone in a vast territory where neighbors were miles away. Emma did her best to help her mother, despite being only 10 years old. She had learned to do the work of someone much older. She collected firewood every day, walking into the forest with a rope to drag back fallen branches. Her small hands often bled from the rough bark, but she never told her mother. She fed the chickens, melted snow for water, and helped cook their simple meals. Sometimes, when her mother cried at night thinking Emma was asleep, Emma pretended not to hear. Food was always scarce. Their meals consisted mostly of thin porridge made from cornmeal, sometimes with a bit of dried meat if they were lucky. Sarah would always give Emma the larger portion, claiming she had already eaten, but Emma knew this was not true. She could see her mother getting thinner, her cheeks growing hollow, her eyes tired. But what could a little girl do? She ate what was given and tried not to ask for more. The nearest town was 2 days' ride on horseback, and they had no horse. They had sold it months ago to buy flour and other necessities. Now they were truly isolated. Cut off from the rest of the world, occasionally, a traveler would pass by their homestead, and Sarah would trade eggs for news or small supplies. But weeks could pass without seeing another soul. The loneliness was almost as hard to bear as the hunger and cold. Montana Territory in 1876 was a dangerous place, especially for a widow and her child. There were stories of conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes, of outlaws who roamed the land, of wild animals that could attack without warning. Sarah kept her husband's old rifle by the door, though she barely knew how to use it. Every strange sound at night made them both jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. Fear became their constant companion. Despite all the hardship, Sarah taught Emma important lessons. She told her daughter that being poor in material things did not mean being poor in spirit. She taught her that kindness was the most valuable thing a person could possess, that helping others was never wrong, even when you had little to give yourself. Sarah would say that compassion costs nothing but means everything. These words became part of who Emma was, shaping the child into someone special. The winter days were long and dark. Emma spent hours sitting by the small fire, mending clothes that were already more patches than original fabric. Sometimes she practiced her letters using a piece of charcoal on a flat piece of wood. Her mother had taught her to read and write. Insisting that education was important even on the frontier, books were a luxury they could not afford. But Sarah remembered stories from her own childhood and told them to Emma on the coldest nights. One thing that kept Emma going was hope. She hoped that spring would come early, that the garden would grow better next year, that somehow their situation would improve. She dreamed of having enough food, a warm coat, maybe even a friend to talk to. These small dreams filled her heart and gave her strength to face each difficult day. She did not know that very soon. Her life would change in ways she could never imagine. As December arrived, the cold became even more brutal. Snow piled high around their cabin, sometimes reaching the window. Sarah worried constantly about their dwindling supplies. They had perhaps enough food for 2 more months if they were very careful. After that, she did not know what would happen. She prayed every night for a miracle, for some way to survive until spring. But miracles seemed like fairy tales in such a harsh reality. Emma noticed her mother's worry, though Sarah tried to hide it. The young girl decided she would work even harder. She would collect more firewood, be more careful with food, and never complain. She wanted to make her mother proud, to show that they could survive together in her young heart. Emma made a promise to herself that she would do whatever it took to help her mother. No task was too hard, no day too long. The McAllister homestead sat at the edge of a great forest, with mountains visible in the distance. It was beautiful but unforgiving land. The soil was difficult to farm, the weather unpredictable, and isolation complete. Many settlers had tried and failed to make a life in such places. Some had packed up and returned east. Others had simply disappeared, becoming another sad story told around campfires. Sarah and Emma were determined not to become such a story. In the evenings, when darkness came early, mother and daughter would sit close to the fire. Sarah would hold Emma's hand and tell her about better days ahead. She spoke of spring flowers, warm sunshine, and full bellies. These moments of togetherness were precious. They reminded both of them why they kept fighting, why they refused to give up. Love and family were all they truly had, and somehow it was enough. Little did Emma know that her next trip into the forest to collect firewood would lead to an encounter that would change everything. That a single act of kindness, born from the lessons her mother had taught her, would bring unexpected consequences. That compassion shown to a stranger would create a bond that transcended cultural differences and fear. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now, Emma was simply a poor, tiny girl living in a struggling homestead, trying to survive another harsh winter in Montana territory. The morning started like any other cold December day. Emma woke up shivering, her breath visible in the frigid air inside the cabin. Her mother was already awake, stirring the fire back to life with the last few pieces of wood from inside. They shared a silent breakfast of watery porridge, each spoonful barely enough to warm their empty stomachs. Emma could see the worry lines deepening on her mother's face. The firewood pile outside was dangerously low. After breakfast, Emma bundled herself in her father's old coat. It was far too big for her small frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands and the hem dragging on the ground. But it was warm, and it still carried the faint smell of her father, which brought her comfort. She wrapped a thin scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes exposed to the bitter cold. Her mother helped her tie the rope around her waist that she would use to drag branches back home. Sarah touched her daughter's cheek gently. "Don't go too far into the forest today," she warned. Her voice carried more concern than usual. "Stay where you can still see the cabin." "The weather looks like it might turn bad," Emma nodded obediently, though they both knew she might have to venture deeper to find good wood. The areas close to the cabin had already been picked clean over the past months. Emma stepped outside into a world of white. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in a thick blanket. The sky was gray and heavy, threatening more snow to come. Her boots crunched through the frozen surface as she made her way toward the tree line. The cold bit at her exposed skin, making her eyes water. She pulled the scarf higher and continued forward. The forest was eerily quiet. Usually, Emma could hear birds or the rustle of small animals. But today there was only silence. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. The bare trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches heavy with snow and ice. Emma moved carefully between them, her eyes scanning the ground for fallen branches that would burn well. She worked methodically, breaking smaller branches off larger fallen logs, testing each piece to make sure it was dry enough to burn. Wet wood would only create smoke without heat, and they could not afford to waste anything. Her hands were numb despite the oversized gloves she wore, full of holes and barely holding together. Still, she continued, knowing her mother needed her to succeed. As Emma ventured deeper into the forest, she lost track of time and distance. The promise she had made to stay close to the cabin faded from her mind as she focused on her task. She had gathered a decent pile of branches and was tying them together with her rope when she heard something unusual. At first, she thought it was an animal, perhaps a wounded deer or fox. But as she listened more carefully, she realized it was something else entirely. It was crying, human crying. Fear gripped Emma's heart. Out here in the wilderness, any unexpected encounter could be dangerous. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind. She should turn around, go home, and tell her mother. Let the adults handle whatever this was. But the crying was so pitiful, so full of pain, that Emma found her feet moving toward the sound before her mind could stop them. She followed the whimpering through a cluster of thick pine trees, their low-hanging branches creating a natural shelter. As she pushed through the snowy boughs, Emma gasped at what she saw. A boy lay crumpled in the snow, his body curled against the cold. He was Native American. She could tell from his clothing and the way his long black hair was braided. He looked younger than her, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The boy's eyes were closed, his lips blue from cold, and his face was pale beneath his darker skin. But what made Emma's stomach turn was his leg. His right ankle was twisted at a terrible angle, clearly broken. The skin around it was swollen and discolored. Snow had partially covered his body, meaning he had been lying there for some time. He was dying, Emma realized with horror. If she left him here, he would freeze to death before nightfall. Emma's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had heard stories about Native Americans all her life. Some people in the territory spoke of them with fear and hatred. Telling tales of violence and raids, her own father had been more moderate, saying that most conflicts came from misunderstandings and that Native people were just protecting their land. But regardless of what was true, Emma had been taught to be cautious. Yet as she looked at the dying boy, all she saw was someone in desperate need. Someone's son, someone's brother, perhaps? He was just a child like her, suffering and alone in the cold. What would her mother do? Emma thought about all the lessons Sarah had taught her about kindness and compassion, about how helping others was never wrong, about how a person's worth was not determined by where they came from or what they looked like. Emma knelt beside the boy, her knees sinking into the deep snow. She touched his shoulder gently, and his eyes flickered open. They were dark brown, filled with pain and confusion. When he saw Emma's face, fear flashed across his features. He tried to move away but cried out in agony as his broken leg shifted. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Shh, it's okay," Emma whispered, though she knew he probably could not understand her words. She hoped her tone would convey that she meant no harm. She looked at his leg again and knew immediately that she could not fix it here. He needed to be warm, needed proper care, and that meant bringing him home. But could she? Would her mother be angry? Would they both be in danger? The boy's eyes closed again. His breathing shallow, he was slipping away. Emma had to make a decision quickly. She thought about her father, about what he would have done. She remembered him once helping a stranger who had collapsed near their property. Remembered him saying that when someone needs help, you don't think about consequences. You just act. Emma made her choice. She would get her mother. Together they would bring this boy to their cabin and try to save his life. It did not matter who he was or where he came from. It only mattered that he was a child in need. She took off her father's big coat and laid it over the boy, tucking it around him as best she could. "I'll be back," she promised. "Please don't die." She ran through the forest faster than she had ever run before, her lungs burning from the cold air. She left her pile of firewood behind, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Branches slapped at her face and arms, but she barely felt them. All she could think about was getting help before it was too late. When the cabin came into view, Emma was gasping for breath. She burst through the door, startling her mother, who was mending clothes by the fire. "Mama!" Emma cried out. "There's a boy! He's hurt bad! His leg is broken and he's freezing! We have to help him! We have to help him right now!" Sarah stood up quickly, her face showing alarm. "What boy? Where?" Emma grabbed her mother's hand, pulling her toward the door. "In the forest? Not far. Please, Mama, he'll die if we don't help." Sarah saw the desperate determination in her daughter's eyes. She reached for her shawl and her husband's rifle. "Show me," she said simply. Together, mother and daughter rushed back into the forest. Emma led the way, retracing her steps through the snow. Her heart pounded with fear that they would be too late, that the boy would already be gone. But when they reached the cluster of pine trees, he was still there, still breathing, though barely. Sarah took one look at the injured child and knew exactly what they had to do. Without hesitation, she handed Emma the rifle and bent down to lift the boy in her arms. Sarah McAllister struggled under the weight of the unconscious boy as she carried him through the snow-covered forest. Though he was small and thin, her own weakness from months of poor eating made every step a challenge. Emma walked beside her mother, carrying the rifle awkwardly in her small hands, watching the tree line nervously for any signs of danger. The journey back to the cabin felt endless, each minute critical as the boy's breathing grew more shallow. When they finally reached the cabin, Sarah kicked the door open and rushed inside. She laid the boy on their only bed, the one she shared with Emma. His body was ice cold to the touch, his skin pale and waxy. Emma quickly added more wood to the fire, not caring now about rationing. They needed heat, and they needed it fast. The flames grew higher. Casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls, Sarah worked with swift efficiency, her hands moving with purpose despite their trembling. She had learned basic medical care from her own mother, who had served as a midwife back east. It was not much, but it was all they had. She began removing the boy's frozen clothing. His deerskin shirt and leggings were stiff with ice. As she peeled them away, she discovered more injuries than just the broken ankle. His body was covered in scratches and bruises, telling a story of a terrible fall or accident. "Emma, fetch snow in the pot," Sarah instructed. "We need to warm him slowly. Too fast and we could hurt him worse." Emma obeyed immediately, scooping fresh snow into their cooking pot and setting it near the fire to melt. She had seen animals die from freezing before, had watched her father try to save a newborn calf once. She knew how dangerous cold could be while the snow melted. Sarah wrapped the boy in every blanket they owned. Leaving only his injured leg exposed, the ankle was grotesquely swollen, bent at an unnatural angle that made Emma feel sick to look at. Sarah examined it carefully, her face grave. "It's badly broken," she murmured, more to herself than to Emma. "I'll have to set it. There's no other choice." Emma watched as her mother gathered supplies. It was not much, just wooden spoons for splints, strips of cloth torn from their already threadbare spare dress, and a leather belt for the boy to bite on if he woke during the procedure. Sarah's hands shook as she arranged everything. Emma could see the fear in her mother's eyes, fear of causing more harm, fear of failing, fear of what might come after if they succeeded. "Mama," Emma said quietly, "you can do this." "I know you can." Sarah looked at her daughter and managed a weak smile. "When did you become so brave, little one?" she asked. Emma did not answer. She did not feel brave, she felt terrified. But sometimes she was learning you had to act despite the fear. The boy stirred slightly as Sarah began to work on his leg. His eyes flickered open, unfocused and confused. When he saw the two strangers hovering over him, panic filled his face. He tried to sit up, tried to move away, but his body was too weak. He spoke rapidly in a language Emma could not understand, his voice cracking with fear and pain. "Shh, we're helping you," Sarah said softly. Gently pressing him back down, she pointed to his leg, then mimed setting it straight, trying to communicate her intentions. The boy's eyes darted between Sarah and Emma, clearly uncertain whether to trust them. But he was too weak to resist. His head fell back against the pillow, tears sliding down his cheeks. Sarah took a deep breath and positioned her hands on either side of the broken ankle. "Emma, hold his shoulders down," she instructed. Emma moved to the head of the bed and placed her small hands on the boy's thin shoulders. She looked into his eyes, trying to convey comfort, trying to tell him without words that everything would be all right. Even though she was not sure it would be, what happened next would haunt Emma's dreams for weeks. The sound of bone grinding against bone as Sarah pulled and twisted the ankle back into place. The boy's scream of agony that seemed to fill the entire cabin. His body arching off the bed with such force that Emma had to use all her strength to hold him down. And then, mercifully, he passed out from the pain, his body going limp. Sarah worked quickly while he was unconscious. She positioned the wooden spoons on either side of his ankle and wrapped them tightly with strips of cloth, creating a crude but effective splint. Her hands were steady now, focused on the task. Once the splint was secure, she covered the leg with a blanket and turned her attention to the rest of his body. The water had warmed to a gentle temperature. Sarah dipped cloths into it and began washing the boy's face and hands. Removing dirt and dried blood, she cleaned his various cuts and scratches, making sure none showed signs of infection. Emma helped, fetching more water, holding bowls, doing whatever her mother needed. They worked together in silent harmony, two women fighting to save a life as they worked. Emma noticed details about the boy. He wore a small leather pouch around his neck, decorated with intricate beadwork. His hair was braided with care, showing that someone loved him. Someone took time to tend to him. He had a family somewhere, Emma realized. People who were probably searching for him right now. People who were sick with worry. The thought made her chest tighten. Hours passed. The boy remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Sarah had done everything she could. Now it was up to him, and to fate. She checked his forehead with the back of her hand and frowned. "He's burning up," she said. "The fever is starting." Emma knew what fever meant. It meant infection. It meant the body fighting for survival. It meant they might still lose him. Sarah prepared cool compresses, laying them across the boy's forehead. When they warmed, she would replace them with fresh ones. It became a cycle, an endless routine. Throughout the long afternoon, Emma took turns with her mother. Neither willing to rest while the boy's life hung in the balance, they had made the choice to save him. Now they had to see it through. Evening came, bringing with it darker concerns. Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the forest. "His people will be looking for him," she said quietly. "When they find him here with us," her voice trailed off. Leaving the terrible possibilities unspoken, Emma understood. They had heard stories of what happened when settlers and natives clashed, of violence and revenge, of misunderstandings that ended in bloodshed. "But we saved him," Emma protested. "Surely they'll see that we helped." Sarah turned to look at her daughter, her expression sad and wise. "People see what they expect to see, little one. They see what fear tells them to see. We can only hope that when his people come, they will see the truth." The words hung heavy in the air between them. As night fell, the boy's fever worsened. He thrashed in the bed, muttering in his language, sometimes crying out. Sarah and Emma took turns holding cool cloths to his burning skin, trying to bring down the dangerous temperature. The cabin was warm from the constantly burning fire, but the boy shivered violently, his teeth chattering. Emma made thin broth from their precious stores of dried meat, even though the boy could not eat. Sarah managed to get small spoonfuls of liquid past his lips. Giving him strength, every drop of broth was a gift, a sacrifice from their own meager supplies. But neither Sarah nor Emma hesitated. They gave freely. Knowing they might go hungrier tomorrow because of it, midnight came and went. Emma dozed in the chair by the fire while Sarah kept vigil by the bed. The world outside was silent and cold. Inside the cabin, the fight for a young life continued, Sarah prayed. Though she had not prayed much since her husband died. She prayed that the boy would live, that his people would understand, that their act of mercy would not bring destruction down upon them. Just before dawn, the fever broke. The boy's skin cooled. His breathing deepened into natural sleep rather than fever-induced delirium. Sarah wept with relief, her tears falling silently onto the rough wooden floor. Emma woke to see her mother crying and rushed over, frightened. But Sarah smiled through her tears. "He's going to live," she whispered. "He's going to live." The winter sun rose slowly over the Montana territory, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Inside the small cabin, Emma woke to find her mother already awake. Sitting beside the bed where the native boy lay sleeping peacefully, his fever had broken during the night, and now his chest rose and fell with steady, healthy breaths. For the first time in 2 days, Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly, though worry lines still creased her forehead. The boy opened his eyes around mid-morning, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. He stared at the rough log walls, the simple fireplace, and the 2 pale-skinned females watching him with cautious hope. For a moment, fear flickered across his face, but then he seemed to remember fragments of what had happened. He tried to sit up and immediately winced as pain shot through his injured leg. Sarah gently pressed him back down, shaking her head and making calming gestures. She pointed to his splinted ankle and then to herself and Emma, trying to communicate that they had helped him. The boy studied them both carefully, his dark eyes intelligent and assessing. Slowly, understanding seemed to dawn. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, then placed his hand over his heart in what appeared to be a sign of gratitude. Emma smiled, relieved that he understood they meant no harm. She ladled some warm broth into a wooden bowl and brought it to him. The boy hesitated, then accepted it with both hands. He drank slowly at first, then more eagerly as his body recognized its desperate need for nourishment. Emma refilled the bowl twice, watching with satisfaction as color began returning to his face. Over the next 2 days, the boy regained strength with remarkable speed. Youth and resilience worked in his favor. Though he could not walk on his broken ankle, he could sit up and move around carefully. Communication between them remained limited to gestures and expressions, but somehow they managed to understand each other. The boy pointed to himself and said a name that sounded like running water. Emma tried to repeat it, but could not quite match the sounds. He smiled at her attempts, the first genuine smile any of them had shared. Emma discovered that despite the language barrier, they could still connect. She showed him how to play simple hand games her father had taught her. He showed her how to make shadow animals on the wall with the firelight, creating deer, eagles, and wolves that seemed to dance across the rough logs. Sarah watched these interactions with mixed emotions. She was glad her daughter had found a moment of childhood joy, but she knew this peace could not last. The boy seemed aware of the sacrifice Sarah and Emma were making for him. He noticed how small their portions of food were, how they gave him the larger share while claiming they were not hungry. He saw the thin blankets they wrapped around themselves while he lay covered in their warmest bedding. Guilt and gratitude warred in his young face. He tried to refuse the extra food, but Sarah would not hear of it. She insisted with firm gestures that he needed it to heal. On the 3rd morning, Emma woke with an idea. The boy could not walk, but perhaps she could help him move around. She found a sturdy fallen branch in the woodpile outside, one that was relatively straight and strong. Using her father's old knife, she worked for hours, stripping away the bark and smoothing the wood. She notched the top to fit comfortably under an arm, creating a crude but functional crutch. When she presented it to the boy, his eyes widened with surprise and appreciation. With Sarah's help, he stood for the first time since the injury. He tested the crutch, putting his weight on it carefully. It held. He took one hop forward, then another. His face lit up with a grin of triumph. For a young person, even temporary disability felt like a prison. Now he had a key to freedom. The boy practiced with the crutch throughout the day, growing more confident with each attempt. He hopped around the small cabin, examining everything with curiosity. He studied the few possessions the McAllisters owned, touched the rough furniture with gentle fingers, looked at the faded photograph of Emma's father that hung on the wall. When he saw the image, he pointed to it, then to Emma, asking a silent question. Emma nodded, tears stinging her eyes. The boy placed his hand over his heart again, a gesture that seemed to mean understanding and sympathy. That evening, as they shared another meager meal, the boy became quiet and thoughtful. He stared into the fire for a long time, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. Emma noticed but said nothing. She had grown fond of this silent boy with expressive eyes and a gentle spirit. Part of her hoped he would stay longer, though she knew that was impossible. He had a family, a people, a life elsewhere. Night fell cold and clear. The stars visible through the small window seemed brighter than usual. Sarah banked the fire and prepared their sleeping arrangements. The boy would take the bed again, while she and Emma would share blankets on the floor. They had done this every night since bringing him home. It had become routine as they settled in for sleep. The boy caught Emma's eye and held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression made her uneasy, though she could not explain why. Emma woke suddenly in the deep hours before dawn. A sound had disturbed her sleep, though she could not identify what. The cabin was dark, except for the faint glow of embers in the fireplace. She lay still, listening. Her mother slept soundly beside her. Exhausted from days of worry and work, Emma sat up slowly and looked toward the bed. It was empty. The blankets were folded neatly, more neatly than they had ever been. Emma's heart began to pound. She stood and checked the entire cabin. Though it only took moments, the boy was gone. The crutch she had made for him was missing. So was the leather pouch he had worn around his neck. He had taken nothing else, not food, not blankets, nothing that belonged to them. Emma rushed to the door and opened it carefully. Trying not to wake her mother, the cold night air hit her face like a slap. She looked out at the moonlit snow, searching for any sign of movement. There, in the fresh snow, she could see tracks. A single footprint alternating with the mark of the crutch, leading away from the cabin and into the forest. The boy had left, probably hours ago. He was gone. She saw the crutch then, leaning carefully against the doorframe. He had brought it back, left it there like a gift returned, or perhaps like a message. Emma picked it up, her fingers tracing the wood she had worked so carefully to smooth. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had known he would have to leave eventually, but she had not expected it to hurt this much. She had not expected to feel this sense of loss. Emma carried the crutch inside and closed the door quietly. She returned to her makeshift bed and lay down, but sleep would not come. She stared at the dark ceiling, thinking about the boy, wondering if he would make it home safely on his injured leg, worrying about him being alone in the wilderness. She hoped his people would find him quickly. She hoped he would remember them kindly. When Sarah woke at dawn and discovered the boy gone, she said nothing for a long time. She simply looked at the empty bed, at the crutch leaning against the wall, at her daughter's red-rimmed eyes. Finally, she spoke. "We did what was right," she said quietly. "That's all we can ever do." Emma nodded, but the words brought little comfort. The day passed slowly. Both mother and daughter were restless, jumping at every sound, looking toward the window constantly. Sarah's worry was different from Emma's. While Emma grieved the loss of an unexpected friend, Sarah feared what might come next. The boy would reach his people, would tell them about the white woman and child who had cared for him. What would happen then? Would they understand? Would they be grateful? Or would they see only settlers, enemies, threats? Sarah checked her husband's rifle multiple times, making sure it was loaded and ready. She had never wanted to use violence, never wanted to hurt anyone, but she would protect her daughter with her life if necessary. Emma noticed these preparations and felt her own fear growing. The cabin that had felt warm with 3 people now felt cold and empty with only 2. Evening came again, bringing with it a sense of foreboding. The wind picked up, howling around the cabin like a living thing. Sarah made dinner, but neither of them had much appetite. They sat by the fire, not speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma found herself thinking about the boy's smile, about the shadow animals on the wall, about how easy it had been to be friends despite all their differences. As night descended completely, Sarah finally spoke the words that had been haunting her all day. "Tomorrow we should prepare," she said. "Gather what we can, be ready to leave if necessary." Emma looked at her mother in shock. "Leave our home?" Sarah's face was grave. "If we must to survive." "Yes." The weight of those words settled over them both like a heavy blanket. Neither of them slept well that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, every crack of ice made them tense. They were waiting, though for what exactly? They could not say. The boy was gone, but his presence lingered. His departure had set something in motion, something they could not control or predict. All they could do was wait and hope. Dawn arrived with an eerie stillness that made Sarah's skin prickle with unease. She had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting by the window with the rifle across her lap, watching the forest edge for any movement. Emma had dozed fitfully, waking every hour with a start, her heart racing from dreams she could not quite remember. The cabin felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in around them. Sarah made weak tea from leaves they had already used twice before, trying to conserve their dwindling supplies. They ate stale cornbread in silence, neither tasting the food. The morning felt heavy with anticipation, like the air before a thunderstorm. Emma kept glancing at the crutch still leaning against the wall, wondering where the boy was now, whether he had made it home safely. "Mama, what do you think will happen?" Emma finally asked, breaking the oppressive quiet. Sarah looked at her daughter's worried face and wished she could offer comfort, but lying seemed worse than silence. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted. "We helped someone who needed it. That's all we know for certain. Whatever comes next is in God's hands now." The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah busied herself with small tasks, organizing their few belongings, mending clothes that barely held together anymore. Emma tried to help, but found herself constantly drawn to the window. Staring out at the white expanse, the forest stood dark and mysterious against the snow, keeping its secrets. Around midday, Emma noticed the birds had stopped singing. The usual chatter of winter sparrows and the occasional call of a crow had vanished completely. An unnatural silence had descended over the world. "Mama," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong." "Listen." Sarah set down her sewing and tilted her head. Her face went pale. "Get away from the window," she ordered, her voice sharp. "Now!" Emma obeyed immediately. Moving to the far corner of the cabin, Sarah grabbed the rifle and positioned herself near the door, her hands shaking slightly. They waited, barely breathing. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. Emma's heart hammered so hard in her chest, she thought it might burst. She wanted to ask what was happening, but fear had stolen her voice. Then they heard it, distant at first, but growing steadily louder. The sound of many horses moving together, hoofbeats pounding against frozen ground like thunder rolling across the plains. Emma's eyes went wide with terror. Sarah's knuckles turned white as she gripped the rifle. They both knew what this meant. A large group was approaching, and there could be only one reason why. "Stay in the corner," Sarah commanded, moving toward the window to peek through a gap in the shutters. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of riders were emerging from the forest. More than she could quickly count, they rode in formation, moving with purpose and discipline toward the cabin. Even from this distance, she could see war paint on their faces. Weapons in their hands, this was not a friendly visit. Emma could hear the horses now, their hoofbeats growing louder with each passing second. The sound filled the cabin, filled her head. Until she could hear nothing else, she pressed herself against the rough log wall, making herself as small as possible. Silent tears streamed down her face. She thought of her father, wished desperately that he was here to protect them, but he was gone, and they were alone. Sarah's mind raced through impossible options. They could not run. The warriors would catch them in seconds. They could not fight. She could maybe fire 1 or 2 shots before being overwhelmed. They could not hide. There was nowhere to go. She felt the weight of her failure as a mother crushing down on her. She had brought them to this moment by choosing to help the boy, and yet, given the choice again, she knew she would make the same decision. The hoofbeats were deafening now, shaking the very foundation of the cabin. Emma covered her ears with her hands, squeezing her eyes shut. She prayed wordlessly, begging for mercy, for protection. For a miracle, the sound reached a crescendo and then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. It meant they had arrived. It meant whatever was going to happen would happen now. Sarah heard voices outside, men speaking in a language she did not understand. The tone was serious, commanding. She heard horses moving around the cabin, surrounding it, cutting off any possibility of escape. Her breath came in short gasps. She forced herself to stay calm. To think clearly, Emma needed her to be strong. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Sarah could see a shadow blocking the thin line of light at the bottom. Someone was standing right outside. She raised the rifle slightly. Not to threaten, but to be ready. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The waiting was torture. Worse than any action could be, then came the knock. 3 solid strikes against the wooden door, deliberate and firm. Not the pounding of someone trying to break in, but the knock of someone requesting entry. Sarah was so surprised she nearly dropped the rifle. She had expected them to simply burst through, to attack without warning. Why were they knocking? What did it mean? Mama! Emma's small voice came from the corner. Trembling and uncertain, Sarah found her own voice somehow. Though it shook, "Stay there, baby, don't move." She approached the door slowly, the rifle still in her hands but lowered now. Her mind screamed warnings, told her this was a trap. But what choice did she have? They were surrounded, trapped. The warriors could break down the door easily if they wanted to. Sarah took a deep breath and called out, "Who's there?" Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. There was no answer, just another series of knocks. More insistent this time, she looked back at Emma huddled in the corner. At her daughter's terrified face, she thought about her late husband, about all the dreams they had shared for their family's future. She thought about the choice she had made to save a dying child. With trembling hands, Sarah unlatched the door. She kept the rifle ready but not aimed. She did not want to appear aggressive, but she would defend her daughter if necessary. She pulled the door open slowly. Revealing the scene outside, what she saw made her gasp. 40 warriors on horseback filled the area around her small cabin. They were magnificent and terrifying at once, dressed in traditional clothing adorned with feathers and beadwork. Their faces were painted with bold designs in red, black, and white. They carried weapons, spears, bows, rifles, and tomahawks. Their horses stamped and snorted, creating clouds of breath in the cold air. It was a sight of such power and presence that Sarah felt her knees go weak. But it was the man standing directly before her door who commanded her full attention. He was tall and imposing, with a bearing that spoke of authority and leadership. He wore an elaborate headdress of eagle feathers that marked him as someone of great importance. His face was stern, carved with lines of age and wisdom, but his eyes, those dark, penetrating eyes, held an expression she could not quite read. The chief, for that is clearly what he was, looked at Sarah, then passed her into the cabin where Emma cowered. His gaze took in everything, the poverty, the fear, the rifle held in shaking hands. Then he did something unexpected. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that left Sarah speechless. Behind the chief, movement caught Sarah's attention. A boy was being helped down from one of the horses. He used a crutch to steady himself. His leg was still splinted. The boy, their boy, the one they had saved, he looked toward the cabin, and when he saw Emma peeking around her mother's skirts, he smiled, that same gentle smile that had lit up their cabin for 3 precious days. The chief spoke then, his voice deep and resonant. Sarah could not understand the words, but the tone was not threatening. He gestured to the boy, then to Sarah and Emma, then placed his hand over his heart. The same gesture the boy had used to show gratitude. Understanding began to dawn on Sarah. Slowly, impossibly, they had not come for revenge. They had come for something else entirely. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The chief stepped back and gestured to one of the warriors. A younger man dismounted and approached. His movements careful and non-threatening, unlike the others. This warrior wore simpler clothing and carried no visible weapons. He stopped a respectful distance from Sarah and spoke in broken but understandable English. "I am 2 Rivers," the man said, his accent thick but his words clear. "I learn your language from traders. I speak for Chief Running Bear." He gestured toward the imposing leader. Sarah's grip on the rifle loosened slightly. The presence of a translator changed everything. It meant they wanted to communicate, not attack. "Please," 2 Rivers continued. "Chief says put down weapon. We come in peace." Sarah hesitated, every instinct screaming not to trust this situation. But she looked at the boy standing among the warriors, saw him nod encouragingly, saw the pleading in his eyes. Slowly, She lowered the rifle and leaned it against the wall inside the cabin. She kept the door partially open, one hand on Emma's shoulder, ready to pull her daughter back inside at the first sign of danger. The chief spoke again, his words flowing in his native tongue, 2 Rivers translated. Chief Running Bear says his heart is filled with gratitude beyond words. You saved his youngest son, Little Hawk, from certain death. For 3 days and nights, warriors searched the forest. Every father's worst fear lived in the chief's heart. He thought his son was lost forever. Emma emerged slowly from behind her mother, her fear beginning to transform into curiosity. Little Hawk, now she knew his name. He waved at her, and despite everything, she found herself waving back. The chief noticed this exchange, and something softened in his stern features. 2 Rivers continued translating as the chief spoke. The boy returned to his village yesterday morning. He told of the white woman and child who found him dying in the snow. He spoke of how you set his broken leg, though the pain was terrible. How you shared your food when you had little. How you gave him your warm blankets. How the small girl made him a crutch so he could walk. The translator paused, then added with emphasis, Chief Running Bear says you treated his son as if he were your own. Tears suddenly blurred Sarah's vision. The weight of 3 days of fear and worry suddenly felt overwhelming. She had expected violence. Perhaps death instead. She was being thanked. The contrast was too much. She swayed slightly, and Emma grabbed her hand, anchoring her. The chief spoke again, longer this time, his voice carrying deep emotion. 2 Rivers translated with care. Chief says, in his culture, a life debt is sacred above all things. You did not know Little Hawk was the chief's son. You did not know our people would be grateful. You helped him because it was right, because your hearts are good. This is the truest form of honor. The chief then gestured broadly to the warriors behind him. 2 Rivers continued. Chief Running Bear has brought gifts, not to repay the debt, for such a debt can never truly be repaid, but to ensure you and your daughter survive, so that your good hearts can continue to bring light into this world. At another gesture from the chief, the warriors began to dismount. What happened next seemed like a dream to Sarah and Emma. The warriors approached the cabin in an organized manner. Each carrying something, they moved with respect. Setting items carefully on the ground near the door, Sarah watched in stunned silence as the pile grew. There were furs, thick and luxurious, beaver, deer, and buffalo pelts that would keep them warm through the harshest winter. There were large bundles of dried meat, enough to feed them for months. Bags of corn and other preserved vegetables were stacked neatly. There were herbs and medicines, their purposes unknown to Sarah but clearly valuable. One warrior brought a beautifully crafted blanket, woven with intricate patterns in rich colors. Emma's eyes grew wider with each addition to the pile. She had never seen such abundance. The items being gifted to them represented more wealth than her family had possessed in years, maybe ever. She looked up at her mother and saw tears streaming down Sarah's face, but they were different tears now. Tears of relief and overwhelming gratitude. The chief spoke again, and 2 Rivers translated with particular solemnity. Chief Running Bear makes a promise. From this day forward, you and your daughter are under the protection of our people. Any who threaten you threaten us. Any who harm you harm the chief's own family. You will never go hungry while we have food. You will never be cold while we have warmth to share. Sarah found her voice, though it cracked with emotion. Please tell the chief, we don't need repayment. We did what anyone should do. We helped a child in need, 2 Rivers translated, and the chief's response was immediate and firm. Chief says this is precisely why you deserve all that is given and more. Because you expect nothing, because your kindness came from the soul, not from desire for reward. The chief then reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew something small. He stepped forward, and Sarah instinctively moved back. But the chief's movements were slow and deliberate. Unthreatening, he approached Emma instead. Kneeling down so his eyes were level with hers, the great chief, leader of warriors, made himself small before a frightened child. He held out his hand, revealing a smooth stone in his palm. It was no ordinary rock. The stone was white with veins of blue running through it. Polished until it shone, intricate symbols had been carved into its surface. Emma looked at her mother, uncertain, Sarah nodded permission. Emma reached out slowly and took the stone. It felt warm in her small hand, almost alive. "Through 2 rivers," the chief explained. "This stone has been in my family for generations. It is a token of our tribe, a symbol of friendship and alliance. Any member of our people who sees this stone will know you are family, you are protected, you are one of us." He closed Emma's fingers around the stone gently. "Keep it safe, little one. It may save your life someday." Little Hawk hobbled forward on his crutch, his father stepping aside to make room. The boy reached into his own pouch and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. He handed it to Emma with a shy smile. She unwrapped it to find a small carved wooden bird. An eagle in flight, the craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed. The boy had made it himself, she somehow knew. A gift from one child to another, Emma clutched both the stone and the wooden eagle to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. The boy did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He smiled wider and placed his hand over his heart, their shared gesture of gratitude and friendship. The chief stood and spoke one final time, his voice carrying across the snow-covered clearing. 2 rivers translated, Chief Running Bear says, "The world is full of darkness and hate, of people who harm each other for foolish reasons. But light exists too in hearts like yours. He hopes that one day, all people, red and white, can live as neighbors and friends. Until that day comes, know that you have allies. You are not alone with that." The chief remounted his horse in one fluid motion. The other warriors did the same. Little Hawk was helped back onto a horse behind one of the warriors. He waved at Emma one last time, and she waved back. Tears running down her cheeks, the chief raised his hand in a final salute, then turned his horse toward the forest. The 40 warriors followed, moving as one. The thunder of hoofbeats filled the air again. But this time the sound brought no fear. Sarah and Emma stood together, watching until the last warrior disappeared into the trees, watching until even the sound faded away. Then Sarah sank to her knees in the snow, pulling Emma into a tight embrace. They held each other and cried, releasing 3 days of terror, exhaustion, and now overwhelming relief. Around them lay gifts beyond measure, but the greatest gift was simpler. They were safe, they were protected, they would survive. The silence after the warriors departed felt profound, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah and Emma remained kneeling in the snow for several minutes, neither speaking, processing what had just happened. The pile of gifts beside their cabin door seemed almost unreal, like something from a fairy tale. Emma kept touching the carved eagle and the protective stone, making sure they were solid and real. Finally, Sarah stood on shaky legs and looked at the abundance before them. "We need to get these things inside before the snow starts again," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. Together, mother and daughter began the work of moving their unexpected fortune into the small cabin. It took many trips. Each bundle was heavy, each fur thick and luxurious. The dried meat alone weighed more than Emma could easily carry as they worked. Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what had occurred. The chief's promise of protection was not a small thing. In this dangerous territory where survival often depended on strength and alliances, they had just gained the most powerful allies possible. They were no longer helpless and alone. The thought brought both comfort and a strange sense of responsibility. Once everything was inside, the cabin looked transformed. Furs were stacked in the corner, creating a pile of warmth and wealth. Bags of corn and dried vegetables lined the walls. The bundles of meat hung from the rafters. Emma ran her hands over a particularly soft beaver pelt, marveling at its texture. "Mama, is this really ours?" she asked, still hardly believing it. "It is." "Sweetheart," Sarah replied, examining the medicinal herbs with fascination. She recognized some from her mother's teachings. Willow bark for pain, sage for cleansing, but others were unknown to her. She would need to learn their uses. Perhaps the tribe would teach her. The thought of future interactions with their new allies brought both excitement and nervousness. That night, for the first time in months, they ate well. Sarah prepared a feast from their new supplies, cooking dried venison with corn and herbs. The smell filled the cabin, rich and nourishing. Emma's stomach growled in anticipation. They had been hungry for so long that the sensation of fullness felt almost foreign. After dinner, they wrapped themselves in the new furs and slept deeply, peacefully, without fear. The next morning brought the first test of their new alliance. Sarah woke to find 3 deer carcasses hanging from a tree near their cabin. Freshly killed and field-dressed, there were no warriors in sight. No indication of who had left them except for distinctive moccasin prints in the snow. The tribe was watching over them, even when unseen. The realization was both comforting and humbling. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Every few days, Sarah would find gifts left quietly. Firewood stacked neatly, fresh game hanging from the tree, once even a repair to their cabin roof that neither she nor Emma had made. The tribe's protection was not just words, but action. They were being cared for as if they truly were family. Emma began leaving her own gifts in return, small things she made with her limited resources. She carved simple wooden animals using her father's knife, trying to imitate the beautiful eagle Little Hawk had given her. She left them where the moccasin prints appeared most often, hoping the warriors would find them and understand her gratitude. The gifts always disappeared, taken, she assumed, and she smiled knowing her small tokens were accepted. One cold afternoon in late January, Sarah looked up from her sewing to see a figure approaching through the snow. Her heart jumped until she recognized Two Rivers. The translator, he was alone, carrying a bundle. She opened the door to greet him, inviting him inside. He accepted with a respectful nod, removing his snow-covered outer wrappings. "I bring message from Chief Running Bear," Two Rivers said, settling near the fire. "Also, I bring this." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal several items: leather for making new clothes, bone needles and sinew thread, and a pouch of colorful beads. "Chief's wife sends these to the woman and girl. She says you need good clothing for winter." Sarah was overwhelmed once again by the generosity. "Please tell her thank you. Tell the chief we are grateful beyond words." Two Rivers nodded. Then his expression became more serious. "I also come with teaching. Chief says you must learn to use the medicine plants. You must know how to make warm clothing from hides. Our ways can help you survive. You will learn?" "Yes," Sarah said immediately. "We want to learn." "We're honored that you would teach us." Two Rivers smiled. The first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Good. I will come each week, teach you our knowledge. This is Chief's wish. You are family now. Family helps each other. Family shares wisdom, true to his word." Two Rivers began visiting regularly. He taught Sarah which plants could heal and which could harm. He showed her how to properly tan hides to make them soft and durable, how to sew with sinew to create waterproof seams. He taught Emma how to make snares for small game, how to read tracks in the snow, how to find food in the winter forest. The knowledge was invaluable, transforming them from helpless settlers into capable frontier women. Spring arrived slowly, melting the deep snow and revealing the brown earth beneath. Sarah and Emma used the seeds the tribe had gifted them to plant a garden. Following Two Rivers' advice, they planted corn in mounds with beans and squash, the way his people had done for generations. The garden thrived in ways their previous attempts never had. One warm afternoon in May, Sarah was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She no longer felt fear at the sound. Instead, she stood and shaded her eyes to see who was coming. It was Little Hawk, riding alongside 2 warriors. His leg had healed completely, and he sat his horse with confident ease. Emma ran out of the cabin when she heard the commotion. Her face lit up when she saw her friend. Little Hawk dismounted and approached, walking without any trace of a limp. He had grown in the months since they last saw him, taller and stronger. He carried something in his hands, another gift. Through hand gestures and the few words they had taught each other, Little Hawk explained that he wanted to teach Emma to ride. One of the warriors had brought a gentle mare, perfect for a beginner. Emma looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding permission. She trusted these people. They had proven their honor many times over. That afternoon, Emma had her first riding lesson. Little Hawk was a patient teacher, showing her how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse through gentle pressure. Emma fell twice but laughed both times. Her fear replaced by exhilaration, Sarah watched from the garden, her heart full of emotions she could barely name. As summer progressed, the relationship between the McAllisters and the tribe deepened. Sarah and Emma were invited to visit the village. A great honor. They went nervously but were welcomed with warmth. Children played with Emma while women showed Sarah their crafts. The chief's wife, a dignified woman named Gentle Rain, took special interest in them, treating them with maternal affection. The alliance became known throughout the territory. Other settlers heard stories of the widow and child under tribal protection. Some were angry, calling Sarah a traitor to her own kind. Others were simply confused, unable to understand such an unlikely friendship. But Sarah no longer cared what others thought. She knew the truth. She had shown kindness when it mattered, and had received kindness beyond measure in return one evening. As Sarah and Emma sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Emma spoke thoughtfully. "Mama, do you think Papa would be proud of us?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I think your father would be amazed by how strong you've become, how brave. He would love that we have friends who care about us." Emma held up the carved eagle Little Hawk had given her, now worn smooth from constant handling. "I'm glad we helped him, even though I was scared." "I'm glad." Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Sometimes the scariest choices lead to the most beautiful outcomes." The protective stone the chief had given Emma now hung on a leather cord around her neck. She never took it off. It was more than a symbol of alliance. It represented a truth she was only beginning to understand, that kindness transcends all boundaries, that humanity connects all people regardless of their differences, that a single act of compassion can change everything. Years passed, and the Montana Territory changed in ways both small and profound. More settlers arrived, bringing with them new conflicts and tensions between natives and newcomers. Violence flared in some regions. Mistrust grew like weeds. But in the area surrounding the McAllister homestead, an unusual peace endured. Word of the alliance between the widow, her daughter, and Chief Running Bear's tribe spread far and wide. Becoming something of a legend, Emma grew from a small, frightened child into a strong young woman. By her 16th birthday, she stood tall and capable, her hands no longer soft but calloused from honest work. She could ride as well as any tribal warrior, could track game through the forest, could speak the native language with increasing fluency. The timid girl who once hid in corners had become someone entirely different, shaped by the friendship that had saved her life in more ways than one. Sarah, too, had transformed. No longer the desperate widow barely surviving each winter, she had become a bridge between two worlds. Settlers with sick children would come to her. Knowing she had learned native medicine from Two Rivers and the tribal healers, she treated fevers with willow bark tea, infected wounds with poultices made from healing plants. She never asked for payment, but people left what they could, and she always had enough. The McAllister cabin had been expanded twice. With help from both tribal warriors and grateful settlers, it now had 2 rooms and a proper stone fireplace. The garden had grown into a small farm, producing more food than Sarah and Emma could eat themselves. They shared the surplus with anyone in need, remembering what it felt like to go hungry. Their generosity was repaid tenfold by a community that respected them. Little Hawk, now known by his adult name Swift Eagle, remained Emma's closest friend. He had grown into a formidable warrior, respected within his tribe for both his courage and his wisdom. Despite pressure from some tribal members who distrusted all whites, he never wavered in his loyalty to the family that had saved his life. He visited often, sometimes bringing his younger siblings, sometimes coming alone to sit and talk with Emma about their dreams for the future. One autumn afternoon when Emma was 17, Swift Eagle arrived with news that made her heart heavy. "My father grows old," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The winters are hard on him now. He speaks often of you and your mother. He says you taught him that judging people by their skin is foolishness. He wants to see you before." His voice trailed off. Unable to finish the thought, Sarah and Emma went to the village immediately, bringing gifts of food and medicine. Chief Running Bear sat by his fire, still proud and dignified, but noticeably weakened by age and illness. His hair had turned completely white, his face more deeply lined. but his eyes still held that penetrating intelligence Emma remembered from their first meeting all those years ago. Through 2 Rivers, who was now an elder himself, the chief spoke. "I have lived a long life, fought many battles, led my people through good times and bad, but saving my son, that was the moment I understood that the future must be different from the past. You showed me that courage and kindness exist in all people, that we are more alike than different." Emma knelt beside the chief, tears streaming down her face. "You changed our lives," she said. "You gave us more than supplies and protection. You gave us purpose. You showed us that friendship can exist even when the world says it's impossible." The chief reached out with a trembling hand and touched her cheek, the gesture of a grandfather to a beloved grandchild. Chief Running Bear died 3 weeks later. His passing was mourned by the entire tribe and by many settlers who had come to respect the wise leader. Emma and Sarah attended the funeral ceremony, one of the few whites ever permitted to participate in such a sacred ritual. They stood with the tribe as equals, as family, crying alongside warriors and elders who had become their people too. Swift Eagle became chief after his father, younger than typical but chosen for his ability to navigate the changing world. His first act as leader was to renew the protection promise his father had made. "The alliance stands forever," he declared in both his language and English. "What my father began, I will continue. Peace between our peoples is possible. This family proves it." Emma eventually married, not a settler, but a man from a neighboring tribe who had heard stories of the white woman who lived as a sister to the people. Their wedding joined 2 families, 2 cultures. In a celebration that would have seemed impossible years before, Sarah danced at her daughter's wedding, her heart full of joy she never imagined feeling again after Thomas died. Children came, beautiful babies with features that blended their mixed heritage. Emma's first daughter she named Sarah, after her mother. Her first son was called Thomas, after her father, but she gave them all native names too, honoring both sides of their identity. These children grew up speaking 2 languages, learning 2 cultures, belonging fully to both worlds and to neither. They were something new, something hopeful. Sarah lived to see her grandchildren grow, living to the remarkable age of 72. In her final days, surrounded by family, both white and native, she reflected on that winter day so long ago. "We had nothing," she whispered to Emma. "We were starving and scared. But we still helped. We still chose kindness. And look what it brought us. Look at this family, this life." Emma held her mother's hand as she passed peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, warriors from 3 tribes came to pay respects. Settlers from 50 miles away traveled to honor the woman who had bridged 2 worlds. The gathering was unprecedented, a testament to one woman's choice to see humanity in everyone. Emma lived on in the homestead for many more years. She became an elder herself. Respected by all who knew her, people sought her wisdom, asked her to mediate disputes between natives and settlers. Her word carried weight because everyone knew her story. Everyone knew that she had lived the values she preached on quiet evenings. Emma would sit on her porch and hold the protective stone the old chief had given her so many years ago, worn smooth now from decades of handling. It remained her most treasured possession. She kept the carved eagle too, though it had been broken and mended several times. These simple objects represented everything important in her life. She told her grandchildren the story often, wanting them to understand where they came from. "Your grandmother and I found a dying boy in the snow," she would begin. "We were poor, we were scared, we had every reason not to help. But we did anyway because it was right, and that choice changed everything." The children would listen with wide eyes, asking questions, wanting to hear again about the 40 warriors, the gifts, the chief's promise. Emma never tired of telling it. Each time she spoke the words, she reinforced the lesson. Kindness matters. Compassion transcends all boundaries. One person, one choice, one moment can echo through generations. The legend of Emma McAllister and Chief Running Bear lived on long after both were gone. It became a story parents told their children on both sides of the cultural divide, a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when fear and hatred seem overwhelming, individuals can choose differently. They can choose to see the humanity in others. They can choose peace, The homestead remained in the family for over a century, each generation adding to it but preserving the original cabin room where it all began. Visitors would come to see the place where the unlikely alliance was born. They would touch the logs of that small room and imagine a terrified woman and child making the brave choice to save a stranger. In time, the story became part of the fabric of the territory itself. History books would mention Emma McAllister as an example of early cooperation between cultures. Though most of the details were lost or romanticized over the years, the core truth remained that a single act of mercy, offered without expectation of reward, had created ripples that spread far beyond one family, one tribe, one moment in time. Emma's final words, spoken to her great-grandchildren just days before she died at 87, captured the essence of her extraordinary life. "The most powerful weapon against hatred is compassion," she said. "The strongest shield against evil is kindness. Never forget that you have the power to change the world. One choice at a time, one person at a time. Choose wisely. Choose love." And so the legacy continued, passed down through blood and story, through the protective stone that remained in the family for generations, through the values that shaped each new child born into that mixed heritage. The world around them continued to struggle with division and conflict. But in that one corner of Montana territory, peace had taken root and flourished, all because one tiny, poor girl had chosen to help a limping native child.